Hello everyone, welcome to another live hangout here at Voice Essentials. I hope you've been having a great weekend. I was asked by a student a couple of hours ago, what did you do over the weekend? And I had to stop and think and, hang on a sec, that's right, we travelled up to Toowoomba, about an hour and a half west of where I am, and I spent some time with family. But when you get asked that question immediately following a weekend, so what did you do? And you go, gee, I can't remember. It's all a bit of a blur, which is kind of how this whole year has felt as we emerge from a world pandemic. I was saying to my wife just the other day, to Jody, can you believe we lived through a pandemic? Isn't that just wild? And for those of us, for so many parts of the world, we're here in Australia. We're so fortunate in how our country was able to respond to it. So hopefully in your part of the world, the pandemic is also starting to come to an end. And I hope in general you're well and healthy and happy and doing well. I can suddenly see. Well, I was wondering where everyone was today when I first started the show, because there's so many people. There's a lack of interaction in the chat, and you can sort of see this direction this direction in the chat. You can see just how we're a little bit slow today, and you know what, I understand that, because we've got it's been 2 weeks since we've been together. Today we're doing a Q&A. A big shout out to all of you who listen to this show either as a podcast, that is, you're not kind of watching YouTube, you're just listening to YouTube and listening to our Q&A today. And also a big shout out to those of you who do either that or watch the show in replay. More of you watch the show as a replay than you do come to the show live, and I love it when you are here live, because then you get to ask your questions and I get to respond to those. And so hello to everyone who is already in the chat. Hello to Karen from Singwise, and Lynn and Mr. Famiati, and who else have we got there? Alonzo and Deep Gravity. Good to have you all jumping in there. And I can see Alonzo has already asked a question there, I think, which we will get to in a moment. If you have a question, today is the day to throw that into the chat, and Linda, the wonderful Linda, will take your question, put it into a Google Doc for me so that I can respond in a moment. We always prioritize super chats, so if you are really keen to see your question answered, because we never get through all of the questions, we never get through all of the questions as they're listed. So if you really want your question answered, just throw a super chat in. All of the dollars that come from the super chat go directly back into facilitating and supporting the channel. So all super chats are gratefully received. And as a part of that, thanks, we prioritize your question. And I say we never get through all the questions, and today will be that day where we get through all the questions. So we're going to get to those in a moment. Just a reminder, next week, so we now, between now and what will be the end of November, so we don't have the show. I give the show a little bit of a hiatus between over December, January. That not only gives me a break, it gives you a break, and it also gives Linda a break. And so we take a break, a 2-month break. It's an extended break, but hopefully absence makes the heart grow fonder. And so we'll come back next year. It'll be a new season. Do you know, I really should take the time to have a look at how many live shows we've done now. It's in the hundreds. I think it's up in the 200, 300 mark. It's a lot of live shows. And we have had so many fantastic guests here on the show as well. And next week's guest, Dr. Melissa Forbes, she heads up the music department in Toowoomba, the University of Southern Queensland. And Dr. Forbes was, believe it or not, she was the first person that I ever interviewed on this channel as a live hangout. In fact, I don't even know that I did it as a live. I think I did it as a pre-record and then edited it and then put it up. I think that's actually how I did it. Anyway, she was the first interview I ever did, and which is going back a long way. Like, it's a long time ago. So I'm looking forward to having Melissa come onto the show for only the second time, but we'll be live, and we're going to be talking about TV talent shows. She's also going to be, because a big part of her research at the moment is focused on TV talent shows and, singing shows like The Voice and Idol and, Your Nation's Got Talent. Yeah, we've got Australia's Got Talent started up last night, I think. So she's done a lot of research into that. And we're also going to talk about how do you research singing? Like, how do you go about that? And I want to give you some insights into how we do explore singing in a, academically robust way, because you would like to think that, we're not just coming up with opinions here, that the research that I often reveal to you on the show, and we have so many researchers come on to the show as guests, that you can really trust the research that they're bringing to us and the findings that they're bringing to us. So anyway, I thought it would be a really cool thing to have Dr. Forbes on, Melissa, come on to the show next week and discuss that. So it's going to be a lot of fun. She's a great gal, and can I tell you, just on the side, a great singer. Like, her jazz singing is brilliant. So this lady is not only a researcher, she's not only a teacher. This girl has some pipes. So make sure you tune in next week for the show. We go live at 1 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time every Monday. I always think it's funny when I say we go live every Monday, because here in Australia we have so many public holidays on a Monday, like we did last week, that we don't ultimately do it every Monday. But certainly between now and the end of November, we will be live every Monday at 1 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. The way for you to be notified for when we go live is make sure you hit the white bell. You've got to subscribe first to the channel, hit the white bell icon, and that way, when I hit the broadcast button, you will be notified by YouTube via email, and you'll always not miss out on a show. And even if that means that you just list that as, watch later, at least you'll be reminded. Enough of all of that. Let's get into looking at our, I've got to hit some buttons here. Let's get into talking about your questions and hopefully come up with some half interesting answers. Okay, so I've got to find a question here, and I think that first question that we had was from Alonzo, and I'm going to jump up here. Let's see if we can find this question. In fact, I'm going to bring that down so we don't. Oh! If you've been watching the show long enough, you would know that I don't. I have Linda, who's taken the questions down for me, but as far as hitting all the buttons to change all the screens, it's all me, which is why sometimes some things go wrong. Okay, so let's have a look at Alonzo's question. I'm being classically trained but have sang pop and gospel. Will it change my voice for the better? I've heard that it will only make it better. I venture to suggest, Alonzo, that where you've been told that it will make it better because you're getting classical training is because that's being told to you by a person who has a prejudice and a bias towards not necessarily with any malice, but certainly a prejudice and bias nonetheless towards classical singing. There is this notion. In fact, I read it in a book the other day and I was like, wow, this is a recently published book. And this person, this author, actually wrote it down saying, if you want to sing well, you must get classical training first and foremost. And I thought, wow, we're still buying into what is so heavily prejudiced and so heavily biased, and it's incorrect. It is not correct. We're talking before about research. There is a mountain of research now which shows us categorically, like there is no argument now to suggest that if you want to sing everything, that classical tuition is the way to go. If you want to be a classical singer, you absolutely must get classical lessons. Classical technique serves a classical singer. But if you want to learn contemporary, pop, rock, jazz, certain areas of music theatre, more contemporary versions, so rock theatre, indie folk, these genres require contemporary technique. I cannot tell you how many times I have singers, good singers, who step into my studio, experienced singers, who step into my studio and having received classical tuition, but their voice is going all wrong. It's not lasting the gigs. It might have kind of been able to cope during their 20s into their 30s, but for some reason we hit our mid-30s, and if your technique is not task-specific, what I observe is we hit our mid-30s and things just start to go a bit haywire. And it's because the musculature is not balanced to the task, and it's driven by too much breath pressure, which drives too much effort, and it creates an inefficiency in the mode of the singing that the singer is doing, in this case, contemporary. If you want to be a contemporary singer, you absolutely must get contemporary tuition. Now, there are classical teachers who also teach contemporary technique. Hear this really carefully, really clearly. We're not talking about repertoire. We are talking about technique. So this is not about you going to a classical teacher who's happy to teach you rock songs. This is about you finding a teacher who knows how to help you set up your voice for contemporary vocals. They are very different things. They are not the same. And as I said, this is not just a matter of different genre. And so, Alonzo, my encouragement to you is to think really carefully about how the classical training is setting up your voice, and being careful to monitor how the balance of what you're being required to do. And you'll notice that around things like your breath, registration, these sorts of aspects, how it is affecting your overall contemporary sound. Now, I don't want to be overly alarmist for you, because as you've just said, you're being classically trained currently, and I don't want you to hear me incorrectly as suggesting that your singing teacher's bad or they're doing something wrong. But I do want you to discern for yourself whether it is fit for purpose, the training that you are receiving. And that may come as you being a little bit concerned to hear all of that. But I really want you to know that the research very clearly states that contemporary singers require contemporary instruction, and so I hope you'll take that on board, Alonzo, and I'm sure you'll do with that as you will. And I've just seen here. Oh, Melvin has thrown in a super chat, which is good of you, Melvin. Thank you. And I'm just going to find your question. I think this is it here. Let's see if we can find it. Melvin is asking, I'm trying to be more aware of shaping my upper palate when singing. I think you might mean your soft palate there. I find it is harder in my lower range than upper range, because in my lower range, I'm dropping my larynx but raising the palate. Yeah, and that's not an unusual thing. And the dropping of the larynx is in part typically encouraged within classical singing. So here's another difference, right? It's not to say that as contemporary singers we never have a sense that our larynx has dropped. But certainly in classical singing, in some versions of instruction, we will find singers being instructed to drop their larynx in some versions of classical technique. But in generally in contemporary, certainly my approach is to really work towards a far more neutral, buoyant position where the larynx is free to move up, is free to move down, but it always comes back to this point of balance, this position. I want to show you something, because in fact, for me to get this something, I've got to go over here. Let me see if I can. I wonder if this is going to be able to. I'm going to do this. Well, not that. I'm going to do this. Let me see if I can. I'm just going to come over here. Oh, I'm going to grab this. And let me just come back. And I'm going to come back over to here. So what we've got, this is a squish toy. And I've actually got a whole video on this. And Linda, for the life of me, I cannot remember what this video is called for us to put it in the description later. But can you see how this, I'm going to hold it up nice and close for us. Can you see how this squish toy is, at no point are the structural elements of the wood connected to each other. They are suspended with a tensegrity so that they can squish but can return to their original shape. Can you see that? Now what we've got there, and if you're listening to this as a podcast, you're not going to see this. This is one of the advantages of watching it as a video as opposed to just listening. But what we've got here is this buoyancy state of the squish toy. This is just a child's squish toy, yeah? But it really shows in a really wonderful sense the way in which our larynx is suspended within the throat. And the fact that, yes, just like the squish toy, you can move it, and in part, that's what we like about the squish toy. It's able to be moved and squished and squashed. The larynx is also able to move up and move down, but we do want it to come back to this semblance of neutrality, this neutral position. And so my encouragement to you, Melvin, is to certainly for contemporary singing, is to go looking to balance your mechanism so that the larynx is able to return to that buoyant position. And so the raising of the soft palate, and the second exercise we do within the Voice Essentials program of learning to sing. It's in Voice Essentials 1. Is a lifting of the soft palate. And I think sometimes I perhaps historically I haven't been as clear as I would like to be in explaining that whilst it's one of the very first things we do, because I want to use that to help singers become internally kinesthetically aware. We have very low proprioception at the back of the throat. If we had high sensitivity at the back of the throat, every time you swallow something, you like really feel it. Fortunately, we don't. And so, but as singers, we do want to be able to get an awareness of what's going on back there. And part of that is you learning to be able to structure and lift the soft palate in such a way as to develop good resonant space at the back of the throat where we primarily develop our tone and we get to really shape our vowels and to a certain extent, other phonemes. And so we want to be able to do that, but we don't equally, whenever I'm singing, I'm not thinking to myself, oh, I need to really lift my soft palate there. I'm more often than not thinking to myself, I want a fuller tone there, and so I activate the soft palate to achieve that, or I create an awareness of space. Now, in keeping with that, there may be a little bit of a drop in the larynx as well, but I'm certainly not going for a lowered larynx, fee, fi, fo, fum, to achieve that end. I'm looking for also a width through the pharyngeal wall. So it's not purely about lowered larynx, heightened, lifted soft palate. It's also about what am I doing through the pharyngeal wall? What is my jaw doing? If I'm dropping my jaw, then I'm probably also, seeking to, it's causing a narrowing at the back of the throat. So these are all these, there's never one thing going on here. We've got to think about a whole range of things that are happening. And so you might like to, Melvin, if you're not already enrolled in my Voice Essentials program, you might like to engage in that. And in fact, Module 1 of Voice Essentials 1 is a completely free preview, and I do provide that exercise I'm just talking about, exercise 2, as a free preview in Voice Essentials 1. So you could certainly take advantage of having a look at that, and it's completely free. But I would also certainly hope that you would explore the program as a complete complete offering. Okay, and I just see your further comment there, Alonzo, saying that you're not formally trained. It's just something that you've thought would be a good thing to do. So take on board perhaps some of the ideas that I'm providing you there. And I see your super chat as a thanks there, Alonzo. Thank you for providing me with that. And in fact, as a follow-up, Alonzo, where is your comment here? You're asking after Mariah Carey's voice, do you think it can return back to where it was? No, I don't, but perhaps not for the reasons you might think. I don't think that. The reason it can't is because Mariah is now, I don't know how, tell me in the chat, someone Google, how old is Mariah Carey? She's got to be a smidge older than me, I think. So, she's well into her 50s. I don't think she's yet 60. How old? Oh, Alonzo's saying she's 52. I thought she was, that means she's only a couple of years older than me, which I'm surprised to hear. I thought she was a bit older than that. But anyway, but the point being is, oh, there we go. Lynn's saying 53. Well, gee, Alonzo, you were close. 52, 53. What's a year between friends? The point here is that if she has not yet gone through menopause as a woman, it will be knocking on her door, I would think. She would be in the midst of that. And the human body ages. It goes through phases of aging, and particularly for women, you know, the hormonal flux of a woman's lifespan is significant, and so we can never return to the 20-something Mariah. It's not possible because she's no longer a 20-something. Now, to the crux of your question, do I think we could ever get back to where we, you know, the full dexterity of Mariah's voice? It's unlikely. I would never want to be the one saying no, definitely not, because, you know, crazy things can happen. But I think it's unlikely, you know, and this is just purely my completely personal held opinion. This is not based on any research or any academia, but the better years of Mariah's career were her early years. That's just me. That's, you know, me as a person who appreciates what her voice was capable of doing back in the 80s and the 90s, because I don't think we hear her able to really do what she could back then. I don't think we hear evidence, true evidence of that now. Could be wrong. I don't follow her closely. I note she's got on the masterclass series, she's got a teaching thing for voice. You know, good for her. So yeah, that's I'm treading carefully, because I certainly wouldn't want to be disrespectful to certainly her 80s and 90s part of her career were stellar, and no one could argue otherwise. Well, at least I don't think you could argue otherwise. That would be interesting to debate, couldn't it? Let's keep moving on here. And Alonzo, thanks for the super chat. Kathy, and this is a question from a couple of weeks ago, which I wanted to follow up on. And that Kathy's asked, she has a question, and let me just come back to here. Kathy has a question where she's asking, why is the first word of a song difficult to sing? And is there anything I can do to help get the song started well consistently? Yeah, interesting question, Kathy. And because it's an interesting thing, we often see the way the voice onsets onto a phrase. And particularly with beginner singers, I often say the way your voice starts a phrase is typically the way the voice will complete the phrase. So what I mean by that is, if your voice starts with a push, where there's this load of air where it blah, then often the phrase will continue in a very forced and effortful pushed manner. That'll be inefficient, it will sound pressed, and it will lack ambient warmth because it'll be quite harsh. That is driven by poor breath management, where there's this volumetric pressure sitting up underneath the larynx, and then suddenly the larynx is given opportunity to release it. And it's when we get that punch of release that it creates the issues going forward. And this is why working on your onsets, and we actually start working on onsets from the very first moment in the Voice Essentials program. We start working on onsets when we start singing the 5-note scale with the y. Ya, ya, ya. And the y is designed to onset the voice, what we refer to as a simultaneous or balanced onset. Yeah. So that if we were to take the y away, can you hear? I'm not or it's not undervalued as well. It's not aspirated. I must say, both of those, the hard onset and the soft onset, both have their place as aesthetic drivers, but as a middle of the road, efficient, habitual onset, we want that clean, balanced onset. Yeah, can you hear? With an onset, when we talk about onset, it's literally that immediate commencement of phonation. So we have two things at play here. We've got the vocal folds coming together, and so they're coming together, and when I sing, yeah, my voice is oscillating at around about, if I was singing an A, I don't know what I'm singing there, but if I was singing an A3, it would be 220 hertz per second, 220 cycles per second. That's one cycle. So you can think your vocal folds are doing that if I sing an A3 at 220 times per second. So if I do that, so that first cycle is the point of onset. It's where the voice starts to create sound. And as I do that, there are two things happening. There's the musculature, the vocal folds coming together, but there's also the air that is actually driving. It's fueling that motion, that ripple wave. And so when we get this motion going, those two things are at play. So when we talk about a simultaneous onset, the air and the musculature is happening simultaneously in a balanced manner. If I do a hard onset, then the musculature is kind of coming together in a very forceful manner so that the air is starting second. This is all happening at a microsecond basis. The muscles are hitting first and causing quite an abrupt commencement of sound, and then the air is getting in there and creating a continuance. If it is a soft onset, the air starts first, and then the vocal folds get moving. Yeah, yeah. And in fact, depending on if you continue with a breathy sound, you might have a bit of a vocal chink at the back. It might come down to how much shearing force there is between the vocal folds. It's, as with most things with singing, it's quite complex. But the point being is that we want to balance out the voice towards a simultaneous onset as a habitual point that you are then able to make aesthetic choices on to either add a hard onset, an aspirated onset, creaky, pressed. There's a number of different values that we apply for onset. So when it comes to then starting a song, you want to think about, well, how is that word causing me to start with a hard onset? Is it starting me with a soft onset? Is it starting me with a balanced onset? Ideally, what you can do is, if it is a hard onset, let's say it's acting, like the word acting like yeah. What you can do is put a y, yakting like, So it's not. You're removing that hard acting, yeah. And then what we're doing is then putting a y in front of it, yakting like, Can you see how that smooths it right out, makes it simultaneous at that very front end of the commencement of phonation? And then what we do is we go looking to apply the y without applying the y, acting like. So now I've removed the really harsh, hard onset. If you don't want the harsh, hard onset, If you do want the harsh, hard onset, acting like, then what you want to do is really look to make sure you're not over driving the air, that you're just allowing the vocal folds to create that really hard onset to then follow through. And hopefully, as you've asked, Kathy, hopefully that can get you your phonation moving quite smoothly. So I'm just jumping in here. We've got another question. Here we go. So this question's from Manib. Hi, Dr. Dan. I sing a lot of phrases that are short, and at the end of every phrase, I've trained myself to take a short breath. I often get stuck as I reach the apex, too much breath. How can I avoid? It's a really common occurrence, Manib. Here in Australia, yesterday we had what is arguably Australia's most famous motor car race, and it's called the Bathurst 1000. I really love watching Formula One, which is more of an international motor sport, and in fact, it was on in Japan yesterday. For those of you who don't follow, and I love my Formula One, but yesterday I did have the Bathurst 1000 on while they're driving over 1,000 kilometers on this track, hence Bathurst 1000, and a big part of what they are doing in motorsport is all centered around the fuel. How much fuel do they need at any given moment to make sure, firstly, that the car's not too heavy? And this really comes into play during what's referred to as the shootout. This is the qualifying to find out who's going to be in pole position. Because if you have too much fuel, then that's going to make the car heavier, they're working on 1,000th of a second, in their timing. And so they're getting down into they're literally getting down into the milliliters of fuel on board to do the absolute fastest that they can do. It's all about track efficiency and speed. And it's the same thing with our singing. I find that singers are in a habit of wanting to always have way too much fuel on board. Talking of having too much, can I have a drink? I'm going to have a drink. Just wet the whistle. And when we have too much fuel on board, what happens is we have to manage that fuel. We're talking air, yeah? And when we have too much fuel, that, by virtue of the fact that we have this big muscle underneath our lungs called the diaphragm has an elastic recoil that wants to come back. It wants to recoil back up. That in turn is increasing the pressure inside the lungs. But what's happening? At the very same time, your larynx is actually holding the air back because that's how it creates sound. It needs to create sound. The vocal folds are coming together. It's only releasing pulses, little minute pulses of air, and that's what's that's what the sound, the resonance, is traveling on as you phonate. And so what we get is this too much pressure, and it's partly driven by the fact that the singer took too much air on in the first place. So this harkens back to what I was saying at the very beginning of the show, and that is a big difference between the way we manage the voice for contemporary and manage the voice for classical. Is one of the key differences is breath management. They are different. And so with a contemporary voice, we are looking to reduce the pressure while we maintain even flow. And to do that, you've got to learn how to take on the right amount of air. If you have too much, you will overpressurize and the larynx will lock up. It'll start to valve and suddenly you've got tension. But if you take too little, what will start to happen is the larynx will start to ration the air, because your body has the ability to detect, hang on a second, I'm running out of air here, but I've still got a phrase to go. Oh dear, I'm going to start to just get tighter and tighter to get to the end. And when we do that, we create, a scenario of wear and tear. And I find with a lot of singers, they're not only doing this once. This is a habitual state of singing that really over time is leading to some real challenges for them vocally. This is one of the reasons why in the Voice Essentials program, I specifically look at breath. I don't just talk about it as an idea that, hey, I think breathing is a good thing. And I equally don't think, humbly, that, and I say humbly because I know of colleagues who disagree with me on this, and I'll put that out there. I don't think you can just simply, allow the voice to do it naturally. There is a school of thought that says, don't worry about the breath. It'll just do it naturally. You breathe naturally, throughout your life. And so, just sing and the breath will take care of itself. I cannot subscribe to that. And I've heard the arguments for it, and I don't think they stack up, because in my studio over the last 28 years of teaching, I am yet to meet a singer, not one, including me, where the body does everything naturally, perfectly. We typically have to train the body how to behave, how to do things, so as to achieve certain outcomes, more efficient outcomes. I said to a student this morning, when it comes to gigging professionally, efficiency is the premium. That is the goal. We are all about building efficiency, because if you have to do this thing 5 nights a week, 3 or 4 sets a night, man, you want to do it efficiently, because otherwise you will not last. And so everything we are doing technically is about building efficiency. Not only efficiency, but efficiency is absolutely at the top of our bucket list. And so coming back to your question about reaching that apex with too much breath, the way to avoid that is to workshop the reduction of pressure and learning to be able to manage that even flow of air, so that you are able to facilitate the phrase. I've got a little saying, you only need as much air as the phrase needs. And that sounds like I'm trivializing it, but that is the facts. You only need as much air as you need. You don't need more, and you certainly don't want less. We're looking for that the Goldilocks zone, an optimal setting, the just right amount. And to learn to do that actually takes a lot of practice. And so my encouragement to you, Manib, is to, start that journey. If you haven't already, start that journey of technically developing your voice. Make no mistake, technically developing your voice is the long road. It absolutely is, and I make no excuses or apologies for that. But those who choose to take the long road and lay a foundation that is firm, solid, and reliable, you will thank yourself for years and years to come. And in a world that is built on expediency and immediate gratification, taking the long road, it's a challenge. But it's a challenge that has great reward for those who choose to take it. And so I'd encourage you, Manib, to consider doing that. And now we're going to go to one question, because I've looked down at the time and gone, ooh, it's that time already. And so we're going to go to Markel's question. I don't think we had any super chats in the meantime. So we're going to go to Markel's question. Markel, you get the last question. How are you, Dan? I'm well, thank you. I am actually well. I wasn't well a couple of weeks ago, but I'm well now, which is good. Went to the gym this morning. My PT, dearie me. Talk about it was leg day today. That was hard work. That was hard work. I'm currently working on my breath support, and I don't know where to start. I tried singing from the diaphragm, but it's not working. Any suggestions? Well, that's in part because the diaphragm is an automated muscle. And this is why we call it breath management, because what we're doing is we actually learn to manage the diaphragmatic motion, but we're doing that via the obliques, the rectus abdominis, the transverse abdominis muscles, and we're managing the diaphragmatic motion via that other musculature. Not to mention the as you inhale, we're also managing it through the external intercostals, and there is some activity going on the exhale through the internal intercostal muscles, which sort of interlink around your ribs. And so we don't. You'll never hear me talk about singing from the diaphragm. I have a video, Markel, one of my older videos actually, about the myth of singing from the diaphragm, because in one sense it's not the exact language we like to use any longer, and it might be worthwhile, Markel, you jumping in and just updating your knowledge around that, and really working about, okay, well, it's learning to manage the entire system for your breathing, and knowing, as we've been talking about for a good chunk of today's Q&A, about how we manage that airflow and doing that in a really efficient manner. I hope you've enjoyed today's show, everyone. I'm just going to jump over here, and I've certainly enjoyed hanging out with you for the last 45, 50 minutes or so. Next week, we have got Dr. Melissa Forbes coming onto the show. We're going to be talking TV talent shows. She has been, now I've done some research and some writing on this field, but her and Dr. Forbes and a couple of colleagues have recently done some far more updated research. I am really interested to find out what they've found, and for you to find out what they've found. It will come as no surprise. I'm not a fan of TV talent shows because, well, come back next week and we will probably hear Dr. Dan get on his soapbox at some point about that whole shebang. But in the meantime, I do hope you have a great week. Hit the thumbs up button if you've enjoyed today. If you don't already, please subscribe. This is just a fabulous community of people here at Voice Essentials, and you might also want to check out our Facebook community group. If you search out Voice Essentials Community on Facebook, you'll find us, and as long as you subscribe to the group rules, we would love to have you join us, and such a supportive group. But for now, I do hope you have a great week, and I will see you again next week when as you'll always hear me finish every show. I'm Dr. Dan. Sing well.